Hello, I'm David Bryant. Welcome to another episode taken from Chapter 5 of my book, The Hour Has Come, as we unpack the promise of a new American revolution through Jesus Christ. Have you ever met a TV personality in real life only to discover they're much shorter in stature than they ever appeared to be on the screen? It can also sometimes take you aback if you find out that they're not as gregarious in real life as they pretend to be on their TV program. You had some kind of misconceptions about them. Well, in this specific series of video clips that we're in the midst of right now, we're looking at three major misconceptions of what a Christ awakening is really all about, and especially an American Christ awakening. What does it look like? What does it involve? Now, the last two video clips, the last two episodes looked at the first two misconceptions. And you can go back and study them anytime. But here we're going to look at misconception and tackle misconception number 3. And here's what it is: that a Christ awakening is a violation of the First Amendment's separation of church and state. Well, let me be quick to reassure you. No legitimate Christ awakening will ever violate the wall of separation between church and state. It can never be controlled by a government entity, nor is its intention ever to take control of political levers of power. The First Amendment of our Constitution sets the stage for how a widespread spiritual awakening should always play itself out within the United States. Pulling from many resources, Gemini AI gives us a succinct description of the pertinent portion of that First Amendment. And I'd like to share with you what it says. It concludes, "The separation of church and state is a constitutional principle primarily from the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment that prevents the government from establishing an official religion or unduly favoring one religion over another, and thereby preserving religious freedom from government interference." Now, while the U.S. doesn't have a literal wall, the concept famously articulated by Thomas Jefferson means the government cannot participate in or control religious affairs and must remain neutral in matters of religion. While he called for separation, Jefferson was not anti-religious. He opposed an established government religion, but he did not oppose a religious nation or government. Rather, Jefferson intended to protect the church from control of the state, but not to keep faith out of government. That's from Gemini AI. As clarified multiple times in this chapter, there is no reason to fear that those involved in a nationwide gospel revival, who are focused on and exalting the saving supremacy of the world's Redeemer and Mediator, will ever attempt to overwhelm our democratic freedom, overstep legitimate constitutional boundaries in order to push their agenda on their fellow citizens. Now, on the one hand, yes, this Spirit-driven, Christ-focused renewal movement most likely will reorient and multiply the focus of many conversations in the public square. But on the other hand, no. This ferment will happen only to the degree that fellow Americans who've been infected with the hope of the gospel and awakened to the glorious redeeming truths about the Savior, they begin to just naturally share their fresh discoveries about Christ with people within their communities and in ordinary relationships, probably mostly just one-on-one. That is to say, awakened Christians certainly will seriously pray about how to take full advantage of other constitutional provisions, like our First Amendment rights regarding free exercise of speech, or another about public expression and demonstration. Take advantage of that by word and deed to advance the cause of Christ throughout the society, but they will always do so in democratically appropriate ways. Now, let me close this episode, and in fact, all of this chapter 5, with these final thoughts. Some years ago, when I was facilitating United citywide prayer gatherings across the nation called concerts of prayer rallies, I was invited to do so from Madison, the capital of Wisconsin. On this warm June night, it was very special. The prayer movement in their city for a Christ awakening, involving 30 congregations, was celebrating its 7th year of monthly prayer gatherings. And to mark that milestone, the leaders brought out a small cake with 7 lit candles. And before the prayer rally began, they gave me the honor of blowing out the candles. However, every time I tried, to my dismay, the flames would just go out and then the light would come right back up again. And after my 5th try, blowing as hard as I could, I finally caught on. These were trick candles that had been made so that the wicks would not stop burning. And then one of the leaders told the audience that any renewal movement God had raised up for their city, which was truly focused on the glory of Christ, could not be put out as long as they stayed faithful. That event comes to my mind as I close this chapter. There are many flames out there that claim to be divinely orchestrated for the renewal of our nation. And I trust that many of them want America to become, before heaven, all that we were meant to be. However, I've seen lots of these flames spring up over the past few decades that sooner or later they just puff out like wandering smoke from a dying wick. And when the Father brings forth an American Christ awakening, it will ignite a host of his saints, ordinary believers like you and me, and it will make us alive with nothing less than a flaming passion for Jesus in view of a fresh revelation of the full extent of the majesty of his saving spectacular supremacy. And in that hour, not only will the holy fire in us be sustained miraculously against all odds, but it will also miraculously spread its renovating blaze far and wide, stoking a roaring bonfire that becomes the new American Revolution. And that's how you and I will know it is the real thing. Okay, now I think it's time for us to focus in on and explore a whole lot more about the very essence of a true Christ awakening. What it is, how it catches on fire, and why it keeps on burning. And there's plenty of fuel ready to set you ablaze, just waiting for you, beginning with chapter 6. So meet me there and discover with me what will win the battle for the soul of America.